Hello and welcome everybody to this session on music career, which is part of the 25th edition of the Time of the Writer Festival. My name is Venice. I'm very glad to be hosting today. I am a bookseller, a translator, literary facilitator, and part of the organizational team of the African Book Festival in Berlin, Germany, which is where we are talking to you from today. My guest is Kalaf Epalanga, who is a musician and a writer from Angola, who is living between Berlin and Lisbon mostly. And he has celebrated huge successes with his band Buraka Som Sistema. They have also won an MTV European Music Award for their work. And he has also written a lot as a columnist for the newspaper, the Portuguese newspaper O Público. He has written for GQ magazine Portugal. He's also written for the independent Angolan online magazine REDE Angola and the Brazilian literary magazine Cinco Quatro Um. And he has published two books which are collections of literary chronicles titled Estórias de Amor para Meninos de Cor, Lovestories for colored kids, or colored children, and the other one is titled O Angolano que Comprou Lisboa por Metade do Preço, the Angolan who bought Lisbon for half price or at half price. But what we are mostly going to talk about today is his debut novel, Também os Brancos Sabem dançar, which translates to Whites Can Dance Too, which has been published in 2017 originally in Portugal. It has since been published in Brazil. There is a Spanish translation out there. And last year, the English translation rights have been acquired by Faber and Faber. So we have an English translation to look forward to, which is scheduled for spring next year. So spring 2023, we all have something to look forward to. He is also a poet, or he used to be, as he told me recently. And some of his poems have been published in an anthology of Black European poets, which was edited by the Congolese author Fiston Mwanza Mujila and published in Germany. And we know each other through the African Book Festival, which he curated was supposed to curate for 2020, which we then had to postpone and cancel for obvious pandemic reasons. But he did curate the 2021 edition of the festival. Welcome, Kalaf. I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you and talk about music, literature, and all the things that we are interested and fan of.
Welcome. I want to give everybody a very brief, or to put your novel in the smallest nutshell possible, which I believe the publishing director at Faber has actually done shortly after they acquired the book, because she said, I really want to quote her here. She said, Kalaf Epalanga is an extraordinary new talent. Epalanga's writing, like his music, traverses all kinds of boundaries. In Whites Can Dance Too, he has embraced autofiction, essay, and travel writing to produce a truly modern novel, cross-border and cross-cultural. While the music gives the story its beating heart, it is really about the intersection of culture, race, and politics. And I really think it sums it up quite well. And what I especially like is this image of the music as the beating heart of the story, which really holds true, at least for me as well. So music is already, dance is in the title, music is in the subtitle of the Portuguese version. It says a musical novel. What role does music play in the book in particular, but also for you and your writing in general?
I like to think myself as a writer first, but music gave me the platform to really excel with my writing, and also gave me the ability to understand what kind of literature I was interested about, and how I want to see the world, and what what are the things that are important to me. I amazes me every time I go to a different country, I encounter a different culture, but somehow the beating drum, the melodies, all those things that we don't even understand connect us. I found music the ultimate art form, is where our human emotions are revealed to the purest form. Is very democratic. I like that. It doesn't require any other medium beside the music itself to connect with others. So what I try to do with literature is basically what musicians do with their music. So make it accessible, make it easy to comprehend, easy to travel between borders. All those things that I learned with music. This book in particular, quite condensed too. Of course, we can talk a little bit more about the title, which can be a little bit provocative. I would say when I was in Brazil, sometime in 2015, I was in a book festival curated by Agualusa, José Eduardo Agualusa, and my fellow countryman. And he asked me to do a table with him about Kuduro, which is the dance music from Angola that started in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s. And when I was talking with the to the audience, I realized how little Afro-Brazilians knew about modern culture or modern music from Angola. And that thing frustrated me a lot because I know so much about Afro-Brazilian culture and all the things that Brazil as a country provided to us in the continent. So I felt like I should correct that. I should make or try to bring a story that help people to understand modern day Angola, modern day Lusophone African countries. And I was sitting on this episode that happened to me on my first European tour that I felt could be a vehicle to portray this, not only this music style, but also a bigger idea, which is quite relevant to the days that we are currently living in, which is migrations from north to south, south to north, east to west, all those things that somehow define, let's say, our cultures. Like in the West, like without migration, we will not have all the things that we value so much, and our way of telling stories even as pretty much defined by migration. So all those things were important to me, and I wanted to encapsulate that with a music style that's it's a little bit unknown in certain parts of the globe. So yeah, that was the premise that I start with.
Yes. So in order to give the audience a short impression of what the book is like, you have actually sent me a little part of the English translation that is in the making, and asked me to read from it, since it is the translation that does make sense. It's not the original text anymore that you wrote. So I will just read a short passage and then we can go on with our discussion. The bus door opened and two police officers in plain clothes with badges around their necks boarded the vehicle. The man, tall and blonde as only a Viking can be, introduced himself to the passengers. I don't recall his exact words, but my mind immediately went back over the reply I'd practiced dozens of times, just in case I were to come across border officers at any point on the 300 3,500 kilometers that I had covered since Lisbon. I was traveling without a passport, having lost it somewhere in a hotel in Paris a few weeks earlier. A nightmare, which at the time forced my band Buraka Som Sistema to cancel a series of engagements, because in addition, since misfortune never shows up to the party unaccompanied, I am an Angolan citizen. When you are an ordinary Angolan citizen, the last thing you want is to lose your papers. I'd give anything for it to have been my phone or the suitcase with my clothes, my laptop, just not the passport, as this meant traveling to Luanda, finding a handler, paying an expediting fee, and then praying to Kianda, our Saint Iphigenia, for her to bless the computers of the Angolan Migration and Foreigners Service for the system not to fail. And I prayed now. I prayed to Saint Elisbao, to Saint Benedict, that I would not falter. I prayed for my voice not to fail me when my turn came to present my papers, for the lie I had prepared for the occasion to come out convincingly, but it did not. I showed my residency card, and the blonde man looked at it suspiciously, asked for my passport. I lied, saying I had it in my suitcase. The other officer, a brunette who looked like she probably did judo professionally, joined us. Apparently, I was the only person on board with a suspect document. I'm sure no other foreigner with a residency card issued by Portuguese Immigration and Borders Service had ever crossed that border before. The blonde man, who could easily have been in our audience the night before, asked me to go fetch my passport, instructing the driver to open the luggage compartment. The two officers escorted me to my suitcase, and in those few meters, I even considered turning back and telling them the truth, confessing that the passport I had to show them was an old and expired one, so devastated by time that nobody in their right mind would ever allow me passage with a document in such a condition. Not only had it expired back when the Angolan revolutionary Jonas Savimbi was still alive and wreaking havoc, but the space for a photograph was occupied by what now looked more like a painting by the Impressionist master Willem de Kooning. My legs trembling, but with the most confident attitude I'd ever boasted, I held out the passport, just like that, rotten-faced, as the Angolans say, and my bold and irresponsible gesture must have set off every alarm in those two officers' heads. Only a madman or a really first-rate criminal would attempt to cross the whole of Europe by bus and train with the threadbare excuse that he's a musician in a Lisbon band and that he was due to play a concert that night at one of the continent's most iconic festivals of electronic music. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I had been in their position. The officers invited me to retrieve my luggage and accompany them to the nearest police station for questioning. I didn't say a word. I felt the sweat forming on my brow, my mouth dry, heart pounding. I was sure any sudden movement would make me throw up. Nobody had asked me to turn missionary, to travel the world like a Mormon elder, spreading the gospel of Kuduro from the slums of Luanda, a musical genre born in the interception of house, techno, kizomba in the late 80s when the Angolan civil war was at its peak, and the youth desperately needed something that could help make sense of the chaos surrounding them. The two officers hadn't exchanged a word since they had got into the car. And with so much silence, I did consider explaining myself, somewhere between begging for my freedom and telling the truth, the whole truth. But what truth? What good would it do for me to explain Kuduro to them? And since it was the author of Ja Respeita-ne that I was listening to when the Viking and the judoka arrested me, I don't think it would be unreasonable to ask, what would Bruno M. do if he were being taken into custody? In any case, I'm sure the two officers would not have been interested in my truth. I kept my mouth shut and fixed my eyes on the landscape. This might be my last chance to see Scandinavia. I would give anything to be on my own, to lose myself in that green and think freely. So this is actually the one incident that came to mind when you were speaking to Agualusa at the festival, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was basically the story that I was holding, and that's absolutely factual. It happened, yeah, I felt like it was a good beginning of a novel. I even didn't really reveal that in interviews or anything like that. I always felt like, okay, I need to do something with this episode, and yeah, and when it was time to write it, I wanted exactly to start right there on that moment, and yeah. Thank you for reading. I'm a terrible reader in English, so I needed some help.
I did try my best. I think that part is also quite interesting because it does have this motive of travel and travel writing. And when I think of travel writing, what comes to my mind is a lot of colonial narratives or privileged white people on their sabbaticals and gap years, traveling the world and reinforcing neo-colonial structures without even being aware of it. And this kind of feels like a counter narrative. Was that one of your aims, one of your goals?
Well, it didn't cross my mind that way. But I did felt that there's not so much traveling literature from African authors. Of course, A Stranger Pose is definitely one of my. I didn't read during that time, but when I read after I published the book from Emmanuel, I felt like, yes, that's exactly what I felt, and also Afropolitan or Afropean, sorry, Afropean by Johnny Pitts. All those books are so important to exist, and also to show all the vast range of African literature or literature produced by Africans or African descent. It's such an important tool. Also, another book that I read before that I feel like, even though it's not so much about traveling literature, but I felt it has that hint, and pretty much can also fall into that category if we really want to stretch out our imagination, which is Open City by Teju Cole. All those books are so important, and yeah, I want to fall into that tradition as well, and just stretch what could be perceived as African literature, which is also a categorization that doesn't really make that much sense if we think on the larger sense of, like, let's say, universal literature. But I do think, as an African, I do see the world from an African perspective. So picking episodes or stories or the relationship that we have with authorities or papers, borders, all those things are conditioned by my point of view. And yeah, I want to be true to my own voice.
Yeah. And I do feel like this exact scene has something to give to different kinds of audiences. Probably every person of color who ever traveled to or within Europe knows that exact fear that is portrayed in that text. They must feel like, I know this situation. They feel understood and represented. While on the other hand, to those who are privileged enough not to get questioned that much at borders, they may have witnessed that situation as an outsider, or it presents them with something new that they have not experienced and might encourage them to try and see the world through another person's eyes from a different perspective. And I was wondering whether you did have some audience or maybe several audiences in mind when you started writing, or whether you just started writing and it can just appeal to different audiences, or whether you actually deliberately try to make the book suitable for various and very different audiences.
When I start a story or a book, even before it turns out into a book, my approach is always trying to write something that I didn't read yet. Yeah, something that I would like to read as well, like something that I would say, yeah, that's an angle or a perspective that I feel like it can coexist within, among the books that I just mentioned, or even like among universal literature. Yes, so that's something that I don't necessarily think about the audience, because I feel like the reader is intelligent. The reader knows how to distinguish a good story or not. So what I try to do is just to be as honest I can be to the story that I want to tell, and not necessarily like who will read, but I also think, of course, a person like me, like coming from Angola, living through civil war, living between this border between West and East Europe, for example. We grew up pretty much immersed on the idea of the Soviet Union and the literature that came from that part of the globe, and also, of course, the Latin Americans, like Cubans, Colombians, so, and of course Brazilians. So that was the literature that formed me. But at the same time, the North America, which was some kind of forbidden in a way, except for the Afro-American literature. That literature, even though with all the dogmas that carried with, from being part of this long American tradition of art, I did felt we could embrace it without that guilty, the thing that trying to be subversive or like it's always tricky, to live in a war zone, and I believe, like when I write, I try to have that in mind. Like I try to portray stories and to bring ideas that people that lived under the same conditions will understand, and also that could be helpful, because I know exactly like how important it was, like, for example, like the Pan-African authors, Senghor, Soyinka, like all those. Yeah, it's such an important and valuable contribution to the idea, or to our, let's say, identity, African identity, that when I approach a book or when I approach a story, I try to continue and to add a chapter or a few pages into that tradition.
Yeah, so we already know that one of the narrators is Kalaf, and it's out of fiction. There is a narrator that is based on your experiences, but it's not the only narrator in the story. There are two more storylines with different narrators. Would you like to tell us a bit about those?
Yes, I it wasn't premeditated. I stumbled upon them. Of course, the first approach was to write a nonfiction, which is also a genre that I like, and because it's challenging, yes, because telling a story that that use your biography, you always need to be more careful, and always what you reveal, what you don't reveal, what your mother will say, what your father will say when they read it. And for example, like in the book, I remove my siblings out of the story. I do have 3 siblings, but they are not part of the story, and all that was premeditated, yeah. And I feel like I failed somehow because I couldn't free myself and just use my biography and just stretch out and come up with great lies or entertaining lies. I failed to that. So I felt that I needed a balance. That's how the Viking came about. So basically, at some point in the book, I switched the table and tell the story from the perspective of the policeman that arrested me. Just because I wanted to free myself, I wanted to just to write without having any boundary or any worry of how people will read it, people that knows me or people that are somehow part of the story. And that was very liberating. But then I felt like it was too masculine in a way. I felt okay. I need a female perspective on the story, and then the third narrator came about. So that was more or less on the process. When I was kind of like finishing the book, I was of course reading it and realized that I was not done yet. I could go a little further. And yeah, and for example, the Sophia, which is the female narrator, I felt like I couldn't tell the story of Kuduro without telling the story of Kizomba. And Kizomba is basically, for the ones that don't know it, some kind of like a bachata from Angola, very much inspired by zouk from the French Antilles. And it's like ball dance, yeah, something that you dance together. And it's very sensual, and it's very, it's beautiful. I have great memories. That's basically, that's how you form your idea of the limitations of your own body and how you relate to the other bodies. And it's such a nurturing space for our culture, because you could, we were again living on a civil war, but the parties and the need of embracing the other bodies and dance together, and that's such a, yeah, I own so much to Kizomba. Not only, of course, the beauty and the festiveness of the music genre, but that emotional space, that place where you could go to when things were really complicated and really dark, when we didn't knew, what to expect about tomorrow, and of course about the future. And Kizomba was always, the soundtrack, of course, but also that emotional space that provide us, with all that nurturing and all the things that somehow, help us to go through those complicated moments. So I wanted to give homage to that as well, because that's where basically the space that provided the right circumstances for Kuduro to exist. And then I needed a narrator to tell that aspect of our culture as well. So then the term narrator came about.
And I know that there has been a bit of backlash when the book was first released about that character of Sophia, because she is a white woman who is the expert on Kizomba and who is a Kizomba teacher and tells its history to the reader. Can you tell us a little bit about what the criticisms were and how you see it and what made you come up with the character that way?
Of course, it was valid. I would say the criticism and because again, when we are writing, we want to tell a story, not the whole story, of course. I didn't want to tell, like the ultimate book on Kizomba. That would be absolutely a different book. But I wanted to paint a picture and to tell a reality. And if we go on YouTube now and we put Kizomba dancing or Kizomba classes, yeah, you will see a lot of white people teaching, from males and females, men, women. Like it's very it became universal. Yeah, it became something that you learn in dance academies, and none of us, I don't remember like going to a Kizomba class in Angola. Like, didn't exist. Yeah, so the idea of a Kizomba teacher within our culture, it's something that is very recent. Yeah, only now, and also because of the African diaspora in Europe, that we start seeing the Kizomba teacher. But I didn't grow up seeing them. Yeah, so when I was telling the story and using the character of a Kizomba teacher, if it was let's say a Black woman, I would have difficulties to tell everything I wanted to tell. Yeah, even like the approach of being didactic. I don't know if you use that word. Yeah, like I had to go into the basics of the music genre. And me, for example, like I'm not a great Kizomba dancer, but I know a few things. When I try to explain to someone, it's very difficult because I grew up with it. But I wanted an outsider. I wanted a vision from someone that is also not only teaching, but is also learning. Yeah, because that person is not an expert, and the character admits that she's growing into the music genre and is learning from the people around her, from her parents and all the Angolan neighbors and friends that somehow also teach the dance to her. So I wanted to explain the music from a perspective of a student as well. Yeah, not necessarily like trying to portray the idea of like, oh, that's the person that knows about it better than anyone else. And I wanted some anecdotes, and I wanted to paint a picture also of the Portuguese society with the what do you say, the returnees. We call it retornados, so the group of people that left Angola in 75, the majority of them Portuguese and white. Yeah, like some of them Angolans, yeah, that consider themselves Angolans, but they felt it was not safe for them to stay in the country, so they left with the independence in 75. I wanted to also place that character within that community, yeah, because they are very saudosistic. I don't know if that word is correct in English, but there are people that have these memories, these ideas of, what Angolan is, and they grab like desperately to those, to the music and to the paintings and the pictures. So they somehow leave Africa on a really encapsulated, unique and strange way that I wanted also to portray. And again, I'm not casting any judgment. I just wanted to tell a story. There's one great book about that from Cardozo. Let me get the title right quick. But that's exactly what I wanted to tell the book. Dulce Maria Cardoso, that's the author. I think the translator is, returnees in English, but I tried to Google right quick, but I couldn't find. But anyways, that group of, some of them claim Africa, some don't. And I wanted to have my character placed on that community, and also having that relationship with the music and so on. But of course, that's all valid points. All the critiques are welcomed. That's always something that I enjoy of listening to and learning from.
Yes, and I found the character quite interesting because it opens, or it almost, I mean, it does give a talking point about cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, and she's a good example of how the lines may be blurred, and sometimes you have to take a deeper look to understand a person. And it, pun intended, it's not all black and white all the time. And that I did really like that you painted a very nuanced picture with that character. And of course, all criticism is valid, absolutely. But she does have this kind of a backstory that does explain her love for and knowledge of Kizomba, that does validate it, and she does just appreciate it and want to get to know the dance and the music, and be in touch with the country that her parents originated from through the music. And that is it is kind of an act of love, so it does make sense, and you kind of understand. But I really like that it's not that there's not really any judgment on it. It's just the story is told. And I did like that kind of in between gray zone that you navigated there, which is
absolutely I found humans very complex, and I wanted, of course, I might fail, and I did feel like I could go a little deeper, especially like understanding the criticisms that came about. But for example, like you visit Lisbon, yeah, and we even said that a lot in interviews. A band like mine would be impossible to exist on another city other than perhaps Paris or London. Yeah. And it's not so often that people put Lisbon alongside those two other cities, because of their relationship with, of course, the ex-colonies, or if you want to go that way, the presence of the African communities on those cities. when we talk about the African community in Lisbon and their culture contributions, it's very rare that we compare that with Paris and London. But I feel like as important. I travel quite a bit around Europe, and I could not really pick any other city. I mean, I'm in Berlin for different reasons, but in terms of creativity, in terms of music, everything I wanted to explore, yeah, you know, Lisbon or Paris or London. There's no other places to do such a thing. Yeah, within, of course, an European city or an European capital, and that's you know. And if you want to translate that into a novel, it's almost impossible to not do that. Like, for example, like even the character that that use a lot of my biographical points, that character navigates through those white spaces and get everything that he feels it's important, or even like is in dialogue with his own culture. Of course, the character of Sophia is different because, again, has this the parents and the relationship that the parents have with Angola. So it's a different character. They are not similar in that sense, but the character, the first narrator of the book, has this, in between, going through spaces and going to looking for these connections, and those connections are real. I can listen to a drum and bass song and know exactly what that song or what dialogues that music genre is making with reggae and jazz. It's very evident. Of course, some people would say, "Oh, it's just electronic music. It's just dance music, and that's it." And the same way, I can go to a Berlin, Berghain, or any other dance music club, listen to a techno song, and know exactly where that thing is connected to the Cubans and Yoruba drumming. Like all this. For me, it's very obvious. Yeah, not so obvious. Yeah, for the average listener. But if I put that on a novel, I will try to make it as basic as I can, and be a little bit didactic, because I needed to explain, why is that happening and why is that possible. Globalization is not just a one-way street. It's like we have different angles and different, yeah.
Yeah, and while you speak of globalization, that was also something that the book, I think, really is a powerful reminder of, that in these times, in the 21st century, everything can travel easily, globally. News, ideas, literature, music, all forms of cultural production via the internet, they travel easily. But the people creating those often face challenges when they want to travel, when they want to cross the same borders. And that's also something that the book really, was a reminder of for me, and that I really did like as an image. And I remember that the first time we actually met, it was in 2018 at the African Book Festival, and you were there as just a member of the audience. And then afterwards we struck up a conversation. And one thing that we talked about was another kind of barriers, language barriers, and that we kind of agreed that it's kind of a pity that there are, when it comes to African literatures, there's always these separate bubbles. Like we have the Francophones here, they do their thing, they are in conversation with France. Then we have the Lusophones, they are their own kind of community and are in contact with Brazilians and with Portugal, but in their Lusophone bubble. And then there's the Anglophones, who are their own private party and are often the only ones recognized internationally. And I was just wondering whether, I mean, it's been 4 years since we had that conversation. I was wondering whether you feel like something has changed in that area for you personally, or also looking at the bigger picture.
I do feel it's changing. Thank God. and sad, yeah, it's very sad for me, because that somehow happened, during the pandemic. That's, I believe, the gift and the curse of the pandemic. Somehow it made it possible with the digital festivals and this format that we are even using now, that made it a little bit possible. I think certain discussions that were happening a little bit before the pandemic, with the, I don't remember the hashtag, but the idea was like, some people were claiming, certain African authors were claiming that, all those book advances that their white counterparts get. There was also one debate that was happening a little bit before the pandemic. Another debate with the francophone writers and authors, asking, for the published houses to ease up a little bit on the rights, and also even like certain rights with classical books that absolutely already paid off, so that people in Africa could access those books in a more fair prices. So all those things were in debate, and of course, translation, other literature in African languages, and also let's say more dialogue or more exchange in between the many Africas that exist on the continent and its diaspora as well. I felt at the time, and I believe it's our responsibility, people that have the ability to navigate through those spaces, people that have the ability to curate festivals and events and stuff like that. It's our responsibility to think about those things. Yes, it's as a writer myself, I had to learn that. I had to go to my country and talk to my readers, and and listen to them complaining about the price of the books, and that forced me to go to my agents and tell, look, we need to change that. We need to change those contracts. Like this, it has to happen. Yeah. So yeah, I do believe things are changing, and I believe the events that happened in between 2020 and 21 exposed that and showed that we do need to embrace all the literature that is being produced, not only on the continent within all different languages, but also the diaspora. I don't stress enough, like, for example, when I think about the Afro-Brazilians, and it was such a relief to see in this festival that Paulo Scott was also a participant on this festival, and I salute Time of the Writer, because that's really important, and we cannot exclude none of us. I don't think we can afford that. There's so many so few of us, like that have the ability to publish and have the ability to present our work on these big publishing houses and even going to those big festivals around the globe. It's our responsibility to talk about it and to highlight those things, because can be a little bit stressful, with the visas and the applications and all that. But yeah, it's all doable. That's how I see it. Yeah, of course, 4 years ago, I had a more, let's say, militant way to approach this topic. But after what I saw during these last 2 years, I would say, yes, things are changing.
Yeah, which is definitely a good thing, and I would agree. And for you personally, I mean, working on the English translation of your book will definitely make it accessible to Anglophone communities or anybody who can read English. Even though it's a British publisher, but the book will probably also make it to African Anglophone communities. Can you tell us a little bit about the translation process? How much are you involved in the process? Because as a translator myself, but into German, it's a different thing because the authors I would translate would not be able to help me much on the German translation because they don't know the language. So how involved are you in the translation process?
Very much. I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to work with one of my favorite translators, Daniel M., and which also is the translator that translated Paul Scott's books, and I think he's even nominated. It's long listed to the Booker, just to ask people to go read Paul Scott novel in English. Yes, it's a process. For me, to work with the translators, it needs someone that you somehow can be friends with, yeah, because it's such a intimate and intense process. If you don't trust the person that is translated, the work will suffer. Yeah. So I had the pleasure to know Daniel because he translated a lot of books, and I go to festivals, I listen to them, and I was lucky enough because he translated Agualuz, and Agualuz is very a good friend of mine. I was able to meet Daniel, talk to him before even really taking serious my work as a writer. So that helped me, because for me the English translation is something that is not that automatic. For example, I would love to know the let's say the German translator that will pick my book eventually, or Chinese or any other language that I don't speak. I would love to have a more close conversation and connection with them, but definitely being able to work as intensively that I'm working now with the English translation somehow defines exactly how I want the book to be perceived and how the story should came about, and we can use that as a balance. Yeah, it's like I can use that as the template of all the other translations somehow. Yeah, I would try to do that, and I like to see that way, but it's very complex, and I'm sensitive with the topic of the giving opportunities to Black translators and how important that is. I'm not dismissive about that, and it's very important. With this book specifically, I wanted to write with someone that I know, that I admire, I didn't want to start a relationship by demand. Of course, different books, different outcomes. For this specifically, being my first, I wanted to write or to translate with someone that knows me very well, and I also know him.
Since we are almost at the end of our time, I have a last and always the most pressing question, which is, what are you currently working on? Maybe besides the translation, what are your current projects musically and concerning literature?
I'm focused on the translation now. It's taking a little bit because we're going really into the details. I think I think you read the book in Portuguese, and also you read a sample that I had before, well, that I was using to get to publishers. And now you are reading a piece of, let's say, what will be the translate, and there are details that are changing, and yeah, so that is taking a little bit. I'm working short stories. I'm having, because it's a relief for me. Like, after being immersed on a novel, I've been working on a TV series before the last 2 years. During the pandemic, I was basically focused on a TV series that I wanted to develop, and now it's time to kind of, it's a bit of a relief and just write stories with the pleasure of writing, not because I conceptualize my books a lot. I take time on the, let's say, on the preparation and things like that. Yeah, I would say those are the two things that I'm focused on: the translation and the short stories.
Great. I can't wait to actually read the entire English translation, to reread it in English, because my Portuguese, I can read Portuguese, but it's hard for me to get the nuances, and yeah, so I am struggling at times a little bit, and sometimes I cannot really appreciate the gems that are there in the language. So I'm really looking forward to rereading the English version. And I want to thank you a lot for this conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. And yes, thank you, Kalaf. Thank you to the audience. Thanks to the Time of the Writer Festival. And I wish everybody a joyful rest of the festival.
Thank you. Thank you so much.